Hello and welcome to the Life of Gaia channel, and particularly to the series called Journey Journals, where we take a journey into unknown spaces to discover ourselves. And today's topic is all around plant medicine integration. And particularly, I'd like to take some time to answer the question, what do I do after my plant medicine ceremony? Now, the reason I find this question so important is that today it seems that entheogens and plant medicines are once again returning to the forefront, and medicines such as ayahuasca, psilocybin, San Pedro, peyote are again coming to the forefront, all thanks to their benefits, which are very, very well documented and studied today. And it seems that more and more people are participating in these experiences, which at times can be absolutely life-changing and profound. And if I have to say, I had one myself, which was actually in 2014, was my very first experience with plant medicine. And, you know, I have to say, looking back now, 9 to 10 years later, it was by far the most profound experience of my life and the most life-altering experience of my life. But at the time, if I have to be very honest, it was also, it was such a profound experience that I didn't actually know what to make of it. And it took me a good 2 weeks post-ceremony to start to integrate and wrap my head around the magnitude of what I'd actually experienced. So I think that this is a very important question. And it seems to me that today, with so many more people starting to have these experiences, that a lot of time and focus is spent looking at, you know, the fasting or the diet, the preparation prior to the ceremony, what to expect, intentions that you may have, and all of that. But I feel that very little time and focus is given to the part post-journey and what people experience once they've had their plant medicine ceremony. So as luck would have it, I had the absolute pleasure and honor very recently, actually, of crossing paths with an incredible lady by the name of Charmaine Husum, who will be introducing herself to us very shortly. She runs an amazing website called Center of the Heart. She's a therapist and counselor, and Charmaine will be introducing herself to us in a couple of seconds. But before she does start, and before I hand it over to her, I would also like to just remind everyone that we are not providing any legal or medical advice here, and we are absolutely not promoting the use of illegal drugs on this video series. So without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Charmaine and have her introduce herself. Welcome, Charmaine.
Hi, Gaia. Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today and talk about these very important pieces that are sometimes overlooked or missed when people begin their journey of healing in using psychedelic medicines, plant medicines, and entheogens and such. But before I begin, I just wanted to name and acknowledge and honor that I'm coming to you from the indigenous lands of the Treaty 7, the Blackfoot, the Métis, Tsuut'ina, and Nakota nations. It's a pleasure and honor to live and work in this region in southern Alberta in Canada. And yeah, so my name's Charmaine Husum. I'm actually an art therapist and a registered therapeutic counselor. I work somatically with my clients to support integration of psychedelic medicines, and also supporting depression, anxiety, and particularly trauma are the areas that I work in. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And psychedelic integration is something that is very important to me, both for personal reasons and professional reasons. I do feel that we're in a psychedelic revolution right now. People are using these medicines for healing. not always getting the support that they're needing afterwards, because we're kind of in this wild west of psychedelics.
Right. Amazing. Thank you so much and welcome. And Charmaine, so you and I have had a couple of conversations over the past couple of weeks, and they've been fascinating, I have to say. And I'd love to start this interview on a slightly more personal note. And I'd love to hear about your first journey and your first experience of spiritual awakening. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm happy to share some of my own personal experiences. I would say my first experience using plant medicines was 10 years ago, using ayahuasca for my own healing. I believe it took me a while to actually come to that point. I do believe that people are called to use the medicine. And so it was something that was in my periphery. I was hearing about it. I was hearing about these ceremonies, these gatherings people were having. And for many years, it was not something that I was interested in pursuing. And then something shifted, and I did feel called to do that, to do the work with the medicine. I would say my experience was not a good one. I didn't feel that it was contained in a way that felt safe.
Interesting.
Yeah, it didn't feel trauma informed. I was working with intergenerational trauma. I was working with my own history. And it was not an experience that I enjoyed at all. And I just couldn't wait for it to be over. So that was interesting. As far as spiritual awakenings, that can happen for different people in many different ways. For me, I felt my connection to spirit, or my connection to something outside of myself, began at a really young age. And an awareness of just energies around me, a sensitivity to what people were feeling around me. And as I had mentioned, I was using this medicine to heal from trauma. And that also often happens for those who have experienced trauma. Our awarenesses of things around us become quite acute, right? Because we're always looking for safety. And
right.
So with that can also be this awareness of positive and supportive energy. So that was my experience in life from a very young age, just being very sensitive to energies around me, which made it interesting moving into this energetic, etheric space of using ayahuasca and psychedelics, because ultimately we are entering that world of spirit.
Sure. And so in a certain sense, you were almost primed for it from a young age, or at least very open to it.
Definitely very open to it, yes. And aware that that I wasn't alone in the world that way.
Beautiful. Yeah. Now, Charmaine, going back to your first journey, right? What did you feel immediately, sort of in the immediate weeks and days after your journey?
Well, it was interesting. Immediately afterwards, well, and I have to back up a bit, because before going into using the medicine, I had these expectations that all would be healed, all my ancestors, generations would be done, my trauma would be over, and it's my experience in working with clients, working with trauma, is that it's not that it's cyclical, but it's like we go in a spiral upward. And so it pops up again in our life, right? But we have new tools to work with it. So I had this expectation that this was the magic bullet. Everything would be fantastic. Trust in the medicine. She will guide you. And that was a little moving into the ceremony. Maybe that was unrealistic. When I came out of ceremony, I had way more questions than I did answers. There was a feeling inside of healing, a calmness in me that I hadn't experienced before. But I was really curious. What was that? What just happened? And immediately what I felt was, I need more medicine. I need to go back. I need to go deeper. I need to do more work. And what I know now, and especially in working in integration, is that's not the case. It's not about going back over and over, taking more and more medicine, because even though psychedelics aren't addictive, going towards a heightened experience is very addictive, can be.
Right.
And so, yeah, so it's interesting that was my experience immediately after, was more questions than I had answers. And also, because the experience was difficult for me, there was a lot of kind of, it had opened up pieces that felt raw of being unsafe in the world.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an interesting insight and thing to point out, because, as I was saying when we started, I feel that a lot of people are very excited to get into plant medicine. There's a lot of talk about it, a lot being written, a lot appearing in media all over the place. And, I feel like, or not even I feel like, I see a lot of people going into plant medicine ceremonies and they're excited about it. There's a lot of talk around how to prepare for it physically, mentally, emotionally. What to eat, what to not eat, how to meditate, how to set intentions. And then the experience happens, and a lot of times there's an integration portion immediately after. But then I find a lot of people, sometimes for weeks, are sort of left a little bit floundering, for lack of better words, as I was myself, because I was in a situation where no one around me had a similar experience, so there was no one to talk to. I was very shy at the time, so didn't feel comfortable reaching out to, the person, the practitioner who had hosted it. And so I was pretty much left to my own devices and in my own head and trying to make sense of the whole thing. And now looking back, it was the most beautiful experience of my life, for sure. But I'd love to hear, what you have to say about that and the preparation and sort of what comes after the ceremony.
Yeah. So what comes after the ceremony, in my experience in working with these medicines, is often there is an integration circle, a circle that happens just where everyone kind of names a little bit about their experience, right? It's not clinical, it's not therapy, but it's just a way of connecting to one another. But I think what happens to each individual after a ceremony is different for everybody, right? Depending on what one is working with, depending on what kind of medicine one is working with, what kind of dosage, what the set and setting were for the experience. But one thing that I'm finding is common among most people that I see when working with integration is something happens energetically. And looking at these medicines from more of an etheric or spiritual perspective, we are moving ourselves from one state of consciousness to another super quickly. And what can often happen when we do that is we leave pieces of our aura behind, right? Our energetic field that protects us gets left behind or has holes in it. And maybe people have heard of this, right? What happens if we don't have that energetic protection around us? And so that's happening energetically. Our nervous system is also going through something very intense as it moves through these states of consciousness so quickly. And as these pieces from life come up, right? The healing pieces come up throughout ceremony. They can be very dysregulating. They can be very scary at times. And they can be beautiful for some.
Yeah, and actually, just circling back to what you said about people having each person's experience is completely different to the next. And even with one person may have multiple different experiences across different ceremonies. And I'd love to speak about, how some people come out of journey and there's this amazing feeling of connection and euphoria, and they come into some profound insights about themselves and all of that, and it's incredible. And then, but at the same time, there are people who have a completely different experience and can leave a ceremony feeling sad, overwhelmed, upset, lost, anything like that. What are some of the sort of potential negative effects, and why is this so, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, there can definitely be negative effects for people, right? Not everyone is meant to use psychedelics for healing. These are powerful medicines.
Right.
And what we're doing, ultimately, the brain is being flooded with neurochemicals, right? It's the same way in using other drugs that people use, recreational drugs even, right? MDMA for healing. In fact, a lot of people report feeling depressed days afterwards, you're right? It's not done in a clinical setting. And so that can happen for others too, using other entheogens or psychedelics, that in the moment of ceremony, there's a flooding of happiness, euphoria. And then we come back to regular life and there's an emptiness. And so, yeah, I feel like it's super important when we're coming out of ceremony, when in the following days and weeks, to connect to community or connect, to somebody, to be able to speak to somebody. It can feel really isolating to go through this experience and not have support afterwards. Another piece too that I find really important is to ground. Ground the body, right? If that's going out for a walk in nature, if that is connecting to yourself through meditation, there's a lot of important aspects to consider in post ceremony.
What would you suggest to someone who's feeling challenged after a ceremony? What would you suggest to them, or what should they do?
Definitely reaching out for support, I find is most important.
Okay.
Absolutely. And reaching out to someone that you feel you'll be understood by. It can not everyone in our friend circle or our family may be these medicines, right? And remembering too, we're using oftentimes, right, we're speaking about indigenous medicines that have been used for thousands of years in community, right? So the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the parents, the siblings, everyone is aware of the power of these medicines and what happens. And there's a sense of community around the integration. There's a sense of, they don't even, from my experience in working with the Shipibo people, is integration isn't even really a thing, because it's just a given that you could just talk to somebody and they would understand. That's not always the way it goes for Westerners, say, going down to South America to use these medicines. They come back home and there's not always a circle of people to talk to or a professional that they can connect with. So definitely, I would say connecting. Isolation is not a healthy place to be, not a healthy experience after having such a profound experience, whether good or bad, using these medicines. So that would definitely be some pieces that I would advise. Another piece that I notice happens for many people after ceremony, depending on how it's gone for them, is there's what some people describe as an ego death.
Okay.
And that can be like an ego death, or it can just be an experience of losing complete control of oneself. And after ceremony, that can be extremely dysregulating. It can also, there's a lot of healing within that too, if worked with in the right way.
Yeah, amazing. I love what you said about the community part. And about being able to integrate it within community, because I have to say, now even 10 years later, I've done, a fair amount of ceremonies in the meantime. And the one thing that I have built up is an absolutely incredible community of people around me who have also journeyed, and it's almost become like a tribe of sorts. But, and it's a very open, very deep conversation where I actually have that experience that you mentioned, that the person knows exactly what you're talking about. And so I agree with you. It's a very refreshing, and positive thing to have around you. I wanted to take a minute to talk about, I run into quite a few people who have, for example, a bad experience with, let's put it in quotes, bad experience with psychedelics, okay? And oftentimes they are reluctant or hesitant to return to the medicine because of the experience. And I'd love to talk about that because, I've had my fair share of bad experiences, again, in quotes, bad experiences. But I found that through the integration of the experience and going into those dark, uncomfortable places, that those were actually some of the best journeys that I've had. And it's almost like there was a gift in them. So I'd love to hear what your opinion and your take is on, perceived bad or uncomfortable experiences.
Yeah. It's interesting when we're talking about these medicines. I wouldn't say they're always trauma informed the way that clinicians are, right? They can move quickly in a way that we may not feel that we're ready for. And that can be really difficult, right? It can open up pieces that need to be supported afterwards. And so I definitely believe that some of these experiences that would be considered bad, when speaking about actual journey within the medicine, that there could be an opening of deeper healing. And it may just be that what's needed before diving into healing these pieces deeper is creating safety for oneself. And so I always say to people, right, a lot of the work I do as a trauma therapist is create safety. That's the first stage of trauma therapy. And a way that we do that, that's extremely helpful and supportive, is connecting to self energy. So finding an energy within oneself where one's intuition, one's empowerment, one's sense of knowing lives. And oftentimes that is a part of self that's beyond physical form.
Okay.
When we're able to kind of cultivate that relationship and connect to that relationship, then we're able to create some inner safety, because it is very dysregulating for some, and psychedelics are not meant for everybody. And these difficult experiences can also be windows into deeper healing that we didn't even know was needed.
Absolutely. Agreed. That's a great answer. And speaking of things to, like going in on yourself and all of that, what are sort of some, maybe 2 or 3 very actionable steps that people could take that are, maybe feeling a bit challenged with their experience and even not feeling challenged with the experience, just, 2 or 3 actionable steps that someone can take sort of post-ceremony to start integrating the experience better?
Yeah. Well, I touched on them a little bit at the beginning, but definitely one of the key ones, excuse me, is meditation. The research is showing now that meditation, it takes the part of the brain that's called the default mode network offline. The part of us that's connected to ego, it takes that offline. And that same thing happens when we're using psychedelics. And so developing a regular meditation practice can be super supportive afterwards. Another thing I always recommend is, like I said, grounding. We need to build back our aura. We need to build back our self energy, build back that sense of safety in the world. And so doing that would be going outside, being in nature, walking mindfully in nature, walking barefoot if that's available to someone where you're at. And then I had mentioned about reaching out to community as being important, but a specific step that I often invite people to do is journaling. And so not just journaling, but automatic writing. So when we're needing to make sense of what happened, often what is very supportive is to really connect to the spirit of the medicine. And I invite people to, through automatic writing, begin asking questions in your journaling.
Charmaine, sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind saying a little bit more about automatic writing and just explaining the process a little bit for people who don't know what it is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's basically just taking a deep breath, connecting with your body, feeling your body on the chair, on the ground, wherever you're sitting, and being mindful and just beginning to write whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
Oftentimes we'll move into the mind, right? And we start thinking about what we're writing. We move out of the present moment to think about what we're going to write in the future. So really staying connected to that present moment by connecting to your breath, connecting to the space beneath you, and just beginning writing whatever comes to mind. And so what I'll invite people to do then is ask a question, and then with another color pen, begin writing as if you were speaking, as if it was the medicine, the spirit of the medicine speaking through you.
Oh, incredible. That's great. Okay.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. It takes a little bit, right? The first try, it might be like, wait, is that coming from my imagination or my head? And well, it doesn't matter. You're not going to share this with anyone. Just try it. But usually after the first couple times of doing it, information will come to you that can be very profound and interesting. And it may be that it's coming from inside you. But one thing that we're learning from using these medicines is we are connected to everything. Just the same way we're connected to one another, we are connected to the spirit of these medicines as well, because we've invited them in.
Agreed. And what a beautiful connection it is. And that sort of brings me to the next question. I remember, again, going back the 9 or 10 years, I had and still have, let's call it a real life, day-to-day life. And then there's the experience that happens with plant medicine, which is so profound. And I remember feeling very, very challenged by sort of integrating the two worlds together, right? Because there was sort of ceremony world and then real everyday today life. And at the beginning, they were as far apart as could possibly be. They've slowly moved together and they're starting to integrate quite well. But at the beginning, it was very, very challenging for me. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to best sort of integrate your spiritual experience, whether it's good or bad, into day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I had mentioned about, connecting to the spirit of the medicine. I do find that if we are able and open to connecting to the spirits of the medicine, right? And if we've used entheogens or plant medicines like ayahuasca, for instance, there'll definitely be a feeling that there is a spirit to the medicine.
Yes.
Even if one is atheist or doesn't believe in anything,
yes,
in self, something shifts, right? Where that is a profound experience. And so I invite people then to connect to that spirit, to invite it in, to call on that spirit in your meditation, in your waking life, asking that spirit to be a support for you, to be an ally for you. And I find this relationship can grow in a way that it's not about going back for more medicine and more answers. You've already taken that spirit inside you, and so you can connect to it in a way that feels supportive and meaningful. The same way that someone may connect with a loved one who's passed and just send love out to them, or memories or wishes or prayers. So, and that's been my personal experience too, that I found really effective in working with the medicine. And even after working with the medicine, that if I'm needing support, just to call on that as kind of
That's wonderful. Charmaine, why do you feel integrating the experience is so important after a psychedelic, after, using psychedelics?
Yeah, well, I had mentioned earlier, like there's personal reasons and there's professional reasons. And so my own experience was that I felt very dysregulated, not just using psychedelics, but even doing breath work, right? I remember one breath work ceremony I had done. And it was a couple weeks where I just felt completely not connected to myself anymore. I spiraled into this depression, and I really needed support afterwards. So definitely these experiences that I've had have taught me that integration, support afterwards is so important. And there's another piece too that I've been noticing, both with my clients and something that's happened with a few friends of mine in the last 5 years. And that is after using these medicines, because people are using them as a last resort, right? This is a magic pill that's going to fix everything. The expectations are high that life will change. And when it doesn't, what I'm hearing, and not even if people have those expectations, but there's a theme that I'm seeing and other colleagues of mine are talking about, and that is suicidal ideation coming after using the medicines. And I have had a couple friends who have died by suicide after using them.
I'm sorry.
Which was just completely unexpected. It was my understanding that all the answers came, all the healing came from here. And what it said to me is that no, healing comes from inside. And I knew this as a therapist, as a trauma therapist, especially, but I was also leaning on, especially ayahuasca for myself, I was leaning on that as an extra tool, an added tool, and that it can be to open windows into deeper healing. But for lasting healing, I believe that work comes from inside. It comes from the integration that happens after ceremonies, after using the medicine. And that's why I feel so passionately about the importance of integration, that people feel that they have done the work, right? They came to the table to we're not talking about a fun night out on a Friday. Right? Like, no, these are not recreational drugs at all.
No, absolutely not.
No.
And it's actually a very challenging experience. And thank you so much for sharing that about your friends. And I'm really sorry for your loss. But it absolutely highlights a critical part of, the whole equation, the suicidal part and the mental health part, which, I'm interested to, from that sort of lead into what had you create courses and programs to help people integrate the whole psychedelic experience?
Yeah, so I see people one-on-one, right, online, person, to help integrate. But what I did was I created a self-paced program, because not everyone wants to see someone in person, right? They want to do something at their own pace, on their own. And so I created a course. It's 8 modules that incorporates yoga, Kundalini yoga, which I'm trained in. I'm a Kundalini yoga teacher. So it incorporates Kundalini yoga, meditations, art therapy, dream work, discussions around neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, what's happening in the body and brain when we're healing, when we're using medicines, as well as journaling. So, and did I mention sacred geometry is in there too?
No.
Another passion of mine, yes. And so, it also follows the 3 stages of trauma therapy that is outlined. Was first outlined by Judith Herman in 1992. Bessel van der Kolk speaks about it widely as well. It's important to follow these 3 stages of trauma therapy when we're working towards healing. And so the program itself follows that model with videos, art directives, write-ups, to lead someone into creating those internal tools that feels like they're coming from inside, and also at the same time honoring the experience of the medicine and connecting to the spirit of the medicine.
Incredible. Yeah, I think it's such a useful course and helpful tool. And you mentioned something about people not always wanting to see someone face to face, and
I find a lot of times the plant medicine experience can be a very, very introspective experience. And, I can speak for myself. I mean, a lot of times I just want to be alone for at least a couple of days with no phone, just to think and process and understand and sort of be with the experience that is oftentimes so profound. So yeah, that's a great and important distinction of, someone not necessarily wanting to meet with someone or speak to someone to integrate. That's great.
Yeah.
Would you say that you promote psychedelics for healing?
No, not at all. Actually, quite the opposite. The lens, the view I take is a harm reduction, trauma-informed lens in the healing work I do. What I'm finding is that people are using these medicines on their own, right? Like I had said earlier, we're kind of in the Wild West here. There's no regulation. They've been used for thousands of years by Indigenous people, but they're now kind of coming into the mainstream in the Western world where people are using them. So in no way do I promote the use, but I'm aware that it's happening. And so my work, I feel like my passion, my work is in creating that safety net to catch people afterwards to help support them in the integration process.
Got it. And just going back to a couple of times during our talk, you made reference to the spirit of the medicine. All right. Now, before actually doing my own plant medicine journey, I would have had no idea what you were talking about. But now that I have, I know exactly what you're talking about. So I would love you to just speak a little bit more into what you mean by connecting to the spirit of the medicine and sort of where you learned to do that.
Yeah, so I'm non-Indigenous myself. So these aren't teachings that I learned from my family, from my culture growing up. But in working with the Shipibo people of Peru is really where I began understanding this in a deeper way, right? And not just that, but my own personal experiences of using the medicine, of using ayahuasca. I would say that it's such a beautiful relationship that can be cultivated and created, right? When you are connecting not even just to the spirit of the medicine, but connecting to your experience you had with the medicine. So we're really learning to stay in that present moment in a way to call that into us again. And there can be different ways people do that too. Often, and I found the work I've done in South America and even in some of the work here in North America, they will be burning Palo Santo, right? Which is like an incense. And just smelling that can bring someone back into that experience, right? Like really tapping into our sensations or our senses can help connect one to spirits in that way. I had mentioned earlier too, the way one might connect to a past relative. I know for myself, I often connect with my grandmother and I feel her energy when I call that in, right? I feel that love. And it doesn't have to be that one psychic, right? It's not that at all.
Right.
And it could be just connecting to one's memories as well, right? We don't need to know the science behind like, how does it feel to connect to spirit? Because there's really no explanation for that scientifically yet. But yeah, I do find though that connecting to the spirits of the medicine in that way where through meditation, through prayer, through intention, can be a support. And I'm just so grateful to all the Indigenous people who have taught these teachings for so many years and are now sharing them with people around the world to help heal our planet, help heal trauma, open and expand consciousness for humans in a way that I believe is going to shift the way that we all walk in this world and allowing a deeper compassion and connection as we begin to understand one another in a deeper way.
I feel it too. I feel it's the one thing that has the power to completely transform our planet. I really do. And Charmaine, in your opinion, what is the most, if you had to put it on like one or two things, like what is the most important healing that comes from psychedelics?
Well, my personal experience and what I've noticed from those I've worked with is that one thing that's the most important is that a window now opens into doing the deeper transformative work. And we're not always aware of what those windows might be. We're not always aware of what the work may even be. And that's something that comes out in art therapy quite often, right? When we're working with our unconscious and allowing our body or the feelings inside to create, where pieces come up that way. But I noticed kind of that parallel in working with psychedelics, that windows are open into awarenesses, connections, deeper healing that may not have happened without.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've given us a lot to think about. And, you know, I feel like we've just sort of touched the surface of the discussion. I feel like there are so many different avenues that we could go down that are one more fascinating than the next. And I feel that we should probably talk about them in future. You know, everything from art therapy, the different psychedelic medicines, the component of mental health and suicide, you know, even for me, even grief and psychedelics and plant medicines and the conjunction of those two, I think, are so important. So I would love to continue the discussion in future and talk more and sort of explore these avenues, you know, further, because I find them so helpful. But I wanted to ask, you know, just in this short space of time that we have, are there any recommended, you know, reading materials or books or videos or things that you could direct people to, or that you have found, you know, incredibly useful to yourself?
Yeah. Actually, one of the most fantastic books I think I have ever read. I've read so many books on using plant medicines, and especially on using ayahuasca in particular, is a book by Dr. Joseph Tafur.
Okay.
And it's called The Fellowship of a River, The Fellowship of the River, a medical doctor's exploration into traditional Amazonian plant medicine.
Okay.
I couldn't believe like how many insights this book had. And I think I'd already read like maybe 10 different books, but this one just had all of the information I needed. And one of the things that really stuck with me in that book, there's so many pieces, but one thing that stuck with me in working in the spirit realm as well, right, which is happening when we're entering this arena of working with psychedelics, is it can be really scary. It can be really alarming, right? For people to see different spirits, depending on what one's experience is. But one thing he said in that book that he found helpful was when spirits would show themselves, or when experiences would show themselves within the medicine, to ask, are you my teacher? And
wow. Okay.
if it wasn't, the experience, the entity, whatever was in front of one, would just evaporate. And I've used that so many times in my own journeys in using medicine. And if it is your teacher, then it opens up. And so many, like in particular, many people speak about seeing snakes when they're using ayahuasca, which can be really scary for a lot of people. And so, or different entities showing up. So just naming that, are you my teacher, and seeing what happens. And then we're also opening ourselves up to deeper awarenesses and understanding, and a grounding that feels safer when in the medicine. Yeah, so that's one book I recommend. And then I have two others here. That one, I think I have an audiobook. Anything by Maria Papaspirou.
Okay.
One I'm just finishing right now, Psychedelics and Psychotherapy. This was a fantastic book, and there's a foreword by Dr. Or by Gabor Mate.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and then this is another one that I'm just loving, Psychedelic Mysteries of the Feminine.
Oh, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, that's it. And that's
okay, those are all great recommendations, and we'll put links to it in the comment section below. And, you know, I love, sorry?
Well, also, I would definitely recommend checking out my online course too, if that's support for people. What I offer in there too is if people wanted to meet one-on-one, there's one free session included, right? Just in case if people are needing extra support.
Awesome. Good to know. You know, I just to backtrack a couple of steps, you were talking about the coming up against, you know, entities or experiences in your journey. And, you know, you said to ask, is it your teacher? And I've never heard of it being referred to in that way, which I think is incredible because everything comes to teach. And I remember one of the things I learned that was so helpful, but so helpful in journeys is, you know, someone explained to me that if you come across something that creates fear in you or makes you fearful, instead of sort of recoiling in fear, which the fear is then what makes it grow bigger and makes it more fearful, is to walk directly into it and challenge it, right? And as you do, it disappears and it just sort of disintegrates, and it's the most incredible experience. And it just, you know, helped me understand what a big component fear is. And a lot of times it's just a feeling. And if you're able to sort of walk straight into it and into that fear, a lot of what was fearful just disintegrates. So really beautiful. I love that part about asking if it's your teacher. Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how you explain that too, right? It's so true. It grows if we give it energy, right?
Right.
So having that courage to walk right into it and know that it will dissolve. And it's such a metaphor for life right now. There's so many pieces out there that can cause us to recoil and avoid and not be in our power. There's so many things that can create fear, and it's definitely a weapon.
Yeah, and I feel that, you know, that's part of the whole integration process of integrating, you know, what happens in a ceremony with day-to-day life, and that whole fear component is definitely something that I've brought over into, you know, day-to-day life, of just starting to be fearless about going into things or trying things or experiencing things, and it's been life-changing. I'm very, very grateful for it.
Yeah, I agree. That's also been my experience. And it's not that fear doesn't come up still, right? There's so many things.
All the time.
Yeah. But I do feel like that I can call on the spirit of the medicines, and not just psychedelic medicines, like some of the other plant medicines that are non-hallucinogenic that they were in the Amazon. Bobinsano is one of my favorites, and I still use it today, right? I have like a hand balm with the Bobinsana in it, and just feeling that they say it's like the princess of the jungle. Yeah, I feel so empowered, and in a way that is blasting through my fear when continuing to use, you know, these different plant medicines, psychedelic or not.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I love how passionate you are about the whole topic. I definitely feel I resonate with it, and it's such an important topic of discussion for me. So it's always such a pleasure to talk to you about it. One very last question before we wrap things up. If you had one sort of overarching message for the world around plant medicines, what would that be?
Yeah, you know, I think what it would be is not to pedestalize them. That power comes from within. And that these medicines open up that awareness and awakening of our own power. But I don't believe in necessarily kind of worshiping a guru, right? I do believe that that lasting intention for peace and calm and joy for oneself needs to come from within. And so, so that would be, even though I honor these medicines, I honor the people that have been stewards of these medicines and brought them forward into the Western world, and other medicines too that may be supportive, right, for others that may be in the lab. But I think the most important thing is to not feel ever that some healing is outside of you. We can lean on supports, but ultimately the healing comes from within. And I do believe that everyone has the ability to move through these difficult experiences, and everyone just needs a little support now and then.
Agreed. Beautiful. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, our time has come to a close, and I'm sorry about that, because it's a topic that I could continue talking about for hours and hours. It is so near and dear to my heart, really. And it's been such a transformational topic for me, just throughout the last 10 years, that I love dedicating time to it. And I love meeting other people who are sort of in the same conversation. It's very beautiful. So thank you for that. And I would like to take a moment, Charmaine, to acknowledge you. I've just met you recently, and you are an absolute beacon of light. I really appreciate, and I'm very grateful for the connection that we have. I'm grateful for your knowledge, for your sharing, for your insights, and for having this discussion with me. It's from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate that. I receive you and receive your messages, and and send that to you too. It's such a pleasure to meet, right? I love how synchronicities work. Well, not that I maybe believe in synchronicities. I think it's all meant to be.
I do.
Yes, what I mean is that I believe it's all meant to be, right? That there's no coincidences. So yeah, it's amazing to meet you and to talk further about all these pieces and how can we help support healing in the world, right? That's a conversation that, never needs to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And speaking of which, I would also like to let people know, just to be in support of, that Charmaine has written an incredible article on 10 different things that you can do and actionable steps that you can take after post-ceremony. And if you look in the comments below, we'll be posting all the different links to Charmaine's website. We'll put the books that she mentioned, Charmaine's course that she mentioned earlier. And please feel free, if you have any comments, suggestions, questions, or anything like that, we are both here. I'm happy to direct the questions to Charmaine. We'll put her contact details below if you'd like to get in touch with her directly. I promise you, she's a wealth of information, as you've probably seen. And if you like the content, subscribe. I'm sure we will be doing more talks between ourselves. And if you have topics of conversation that you are interested in, that you'd like us to address, please feel free to put those too. And with that, again, Charmaine, very, very grateful to you again. And thank you so much for this time together.
Yes, thank you. And blessings to everybody.